Hi guys, this is Žiga from 2100 News. Today I'm here with Nataša Pirc Musar, attorney at law and an expert on personal data protection. How are you doing, Nataša?
Fine, thank you. Glad to be here with you, Žiga.
Thank you very much. Could you tell us a little bit more about GDPR?
GDPR is basically now a hot topic in the privacy world we are discussing right now. GDPR is a general data protection regulation which was enacted in European Parliament 2 years ago, and on 25th of May it is going to be put into force. This is why nowadays, in those couple of months before the enactment of the act, of the regulation, a lot of entities, a lot of directors, CEOs are actually quite nervous whether they are compliant or not. They're right to be nervous a bit, but I always say don't be in a panic. Nothing will change drastically on the 25th of May. It's not going to be the end of the world. But anyway, most of the companies in public and in private sector, they will have to be compliant after 25th of May this year. GDPR is bringing a lot of novelties which are now basically a bit differently regulated than under the old Directive 95/46, which was valid from the year 1995. Whenever I say year 1995, a lot of guys, especially from the Silicon Valley, a lot of geeks, they do know that in 1995 the legislator didn't have a clue what the modern technologies will bring into the world of privacy. And in fact, I don't know whether you know, we got the internet to a wider use in Europe in 1996. So only a year after the directive was enacted in European Parliament. And those guys, the lawyers which were drafting the directive, they didn't have a clue what the internet is going to bring to a nowadays society. In the last couple of years, we are not discussing only internet, we are discussing crypto world, we are discussing blockchain. And all of it, I mean, you have to imagine and you have to know that behind the scenes of this new modern technologies world is a lot of data processing going on. This is why the legislator in Brussels decided to enact the regulation which should, and I hope it will, unify the data protection world in European Union. And there is one more key focus regarding the GDPR as well. Also for the companies which are not established on the territory of European Union, we are discussing a so-called extraterritoriality of the regulation. So even the companies from India, from United States of America, all the countries outside of the 28 member states of European Union will have to comply with GDPR if they offer services or products on the territory of European Union. So the day D is approaching with a lot of novelties, a lot of things will have to be done differently, and I suggest that you better start, if you are a private entity processing personal data, at least reading a GDPR and try to find whether you are compliant or not.
How does the companies get ready for it?
That's a complex question. The first thing I think everybody should do is to check how many data filing systems you basically have within your company. If you do not know what data filing systems you have, what personal data you are processing, and on what legal ground, then you are going to be lost in the world of GDPR. So this is the first task to check, to see the problems that modern entities, big or small, it doesn't matter, they have today is that a lot of data filing systems are not in sophisticated content management systems. Some of them are in Excel sheets, some of them are even on hard copy, on paper. So if you do not have an overview of what you are doing in the world of data processing, you cannot even start trying to be GDPR compliant.
So I think it's the best to hire somebody to advise you on that, or even a company needs to get its own GDPR officer.
Of course, if you are not an expert on GDPR and personal data, and if you do not have lawyers or people who do know, stuff about GDPR, it's going to be hard for you. My suggestion as an advisor, and I really do now a lot of work with the biggest Slovenian, Croatian and Serbian companies, we work in the Balkan region, is that, of course, you do have to hire an expert, but you have to be an assistant to that expert. If you're going to do this on a key, so please make me GDPR compliant, when the experts, when the advisors are going to leave your company, you'll be lost again. So my suggestion is be an assistant to a GDPR expert, prepare as much as you can on your own, because after the advisors are going to leave, you will be on your own. You will have to continue to be compliant. But yes, a lot of GDPR topics are really, really sophisticated, legally demanding, and if you do not know how to do it on your own, hire an expert and hire a proper GDPR expert. Maybe I can use the opportunity also to explain that in the last half a year I see a lot of new emerging GDPR experts who claim to be GDPR experts because they read a GDPR once and now they think they know the topic. I mean, I deal with this for more than 15 years and I know all the bits and parts and hidden parts of the data protection world. And at the end, I always say, would you operate your heart and hire a dermatologist to do it? It's the same in law. Don't hire a tax expert. Don't hire a house lawyer who doesn't know anything about GDPR. It is a very complicated field. And just one sentence more, if I may. They often say, that to be GDPR compliant is very expensive. But I say one more sentence. It is even more expensive not to be compliant.
Yeah, that's very good. Could you maybe just quickly tell us how long does the process to get compliant take?
Oof, it depends. Yeah, it depends how big the company is, how many data filing systems you have. And even if you have only 1 or 2 data filing systems, and if you have an enormous amount of personal data in that system, that takes more time to evaluate everything. But normally, the big companies who have, for example, huge loyalty clubs. In loyalty clubs, they really have to be sensitive and more careful about GDPR because they are entering into the world of behavioral marketing where behind the scenes you have to be aware it's automated data processing, making profiles, and this is a huge invasion into the person's privacy, so it takes more time to be compliant. But on average, I would say a big company, it needs half a year. A medium-sized company, 3 months to go through all the checks. Small companies, maybe they need a month or 3 weeks, but they have to work continuously after they think they are compliant already. So GDPR is an ongoing process.
Thank you very much. If I follow back on your previous answer when you said it costs even more not to be compliant, company can probably get fined heavily for it, or what are the penalties for it?
You have to know that GDPR was drafted not for the small or medium-sized companies, but it was drafted for huge big data processors like Google, Amazon, AT&T, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Cambridge Analytica. I don't know whether you followed what happened in the previous week regarding the data processing of the huge behavioral data processor Cambridge Analytica. So fines are actually draconically high. If you violate GDPR in a minor way, you can be fined up to 2% of your annual turnover. If you are going to make a heavy misdemeanor, a heavy illegal processing, you can be fined up to 4% of the annual turnover. So for the big companies, this is, a serious threat. Maybe one example from my practice, I was the information commissioner of the Republic of Slovenia, and when Google entered Slovenian market to do a Google Street View, we had a heavy discussion whether they can do it, whether this is in accordance to Slovenian data protection law. And I said, please guys, don't do the filming, don't take photos in front of the abortion clinics. Don't go in front of the clinics where HIV positive patients are treated. So you have to be careful about those things. And at the end, I had a sense when they asked, Natasha, how much can you penalize us? And when I said, it's 4,500 euros, I think they said to themselves, okay, she can just do it. Because the penalty is really, in some countries was really so low that it was okay to violate the law because it was cheap. So you have to be aware that the GDPR was drafted for those big data guys who are globally processing a huge amount of data. Talking to my ex-commissioner friends around Europe and with my colleagues in Slovenia, the information commissioners all around Europe are aware that it is not easy to be compliant and you cannot do it over the night. And I can easily say, and I think this is going to be the case, that on the 25th of May, If I may tell a joke, not all 4,000 inspectors will go on field in Slovenia, they only have 10 anyway. So, and a lot of commissioners are now establishing a so-called preventive department. So they know that they will have to discuss GDPR with clients, they will have to give guidance. But after a year or two, they will not be polite anymore, because they know that this transition period is going to be over. So the sooner you start, the better.
So there is actually a transition period, because when you said the small and medium companies are probably going to need around 3 to 6 months,
yeah.
And I would bet that a lot of them don't even know.
90% of them, they are not aware that GDPR is coming. In Slovenian under regulation law, which is now in the governmental process, it is written that in a year they have to make new consent forms, which is it's very important for the direct marketing purposes. And they have half a year to become totally compliant with GDPR. But if the inspector comes in this period, they will have to show that they are working on a topic. If the inspector will find out that they are not doing anything, so this transition period is not going to be valid for them.
Yeah, of course. Nataša, what are the basic novelties that GDPR brings to the data protection world?
There are quite few that all public and private entities have to be careful about. One of the most important ones is the obligation to nominate a data protection officer. Regarding GDPR, the data protection officer has to be nominated in all public sector authorities and in private sector within all data processing, where data controllers are processing so-called sensitive personal data. GDPR calls it special categories of personal data, which is health data, sex orientation, political thinking, philosophical thinking, membership in trade unions. So this is the most sensitive data you have to take care of. And if you are a big data controller, then you have to know that if you are entering into the world of behavioral marketing, as I mentioned before, and if you are processing data within the automated data processing, establishing huge profiles of a certain individual, then you have to have a data protection officer as well. And before you start with such an invasive data processing, you have to make and perform a so-called privacy impact assessment. Then a new thing within GDPR is also data portability, where all the data controllers need to be aware that when a certain individual comes to you and seek the data you are processing about him, he can claim, give me my data in a machine-readable format, or even they can say, you have to send my data in machine-readable format to another data controller. So this is also something which is completely new. Then we are discussing the new right, which is called the right to be forgotten. So do we really have the right that the internet forgets about the thing that we did in the past and are now causing harm to me as an individual? This is especially important for our kids who are connected to the digital world 24/7. And the GDPR is saying, okay, kids were careless when they were young, but nowadays, if they want to get employed, there is no employer who would not Google or Facebook a certain individual and check what kind of digital footprints somebody left on the internet and in the digital world. And there is another very technological obligation of the data controller, which is to inform all the data subjects when the data breach has happened. That means if somebody, a hacker, entered into the data filing system, and if the data was stolen from the system, then the data controller has to notify all the data subjects if the revealed data can cause harm to that data subject. In most of the cases this can happen. Maybe you do remember it was a couple of years ago when a hacker hacked into the system of a Sony PlayStation. They stole, I think, the 25 million data of the credit cards and the payment procedures of the buyers of the Sony PlayStation. So in such cases, if this is going to happen, data subjects will have to be notified in 72 hours. And the data controller will have to notify also a supervisory authority. And another very important topic is how to get a consent of an individual. So we do have, 6 legal grounds to process personal data. Consent is only one of them. But if you want to heavily invade into a person's privacy, if you want to make a profile, if you want to connect to an individual through the behavioral marketing, then you have to have a consent. And one more thing, which is going to be also interesting for the guys from the IT world. GDPR is now totally clear on a couple of new personal data. There is no doubt, for example, that IP address is personal data. There is no doubt that ID of a cookie is personal data. There is no doubt that other web identifiers are personal data, web beacons and so forth and so forth. So this is what is going on in the digital world. And another new personal data, also very usable in direct marketing purposes, it's RFID, radio frequency identification chips. So this is connected to the world of Internet of Things. So a lot of novelties for the IT world, a lot of them are mostly legal, but some of them are also technical.
Nataša, thank you very much for your time. Žiga from 2100 News. GDPR is approaching and I hope this was very informational for you. Thank you.